Hello and welcome to Useful Idiots. I'm one of your hosts, Katie Halper, and I'm joining you from London.
And I'm Aaron Maté, and this is Monday Morning, where we watch the Sunday morning news show so that you don't have to. Thank you so much for being here. Another exciting Sunday recap show ahead, although we're handicapped. We're without a regular Meet the Press because of the Olympics, but still so much to get to.
Yeah, and so many apologies. We should have warned you that we weren't going to have Meet the Press today, but hopefully we will carry on. So, yeah. And should we just get to it as bereft as we are of Meet the Press content?
Well, on Sunday morning, the U.S. woke up to news that Israel was mulling a massive escalation of its, regular assaults on Lebanon after a missile strike killed 12 people in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The Golan Heights belonged to Syria, but Israel stole that in 1967 and hasn't given it back. And Israel blamed Hezbollah of this strike, which killed 12 Syrian Druze, not even Israeli citizens. Hezbollah denied this, said that it was not responsible for the strike. And for Hezbollah to deny something, is a rare thing. Usually they take credit for any strike that they carry out. So in this case, they're saying it was not Hezbollah that did this. It was Israel, an errant Israeli Iron Dome missile defense strike. Of course, the corporate media and U.S. politicians just took Israel's word for it. And now we're at the risk of another major Israeli escalation in Lebanon in purported retaliation for a strike that it blames on Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah denies it. So let's see what Senator Chuck Schumer, a regular friend of Israel, had to say.
But also, Aaron, to be fair, it makes sense that the media is not questioning Israel's veracity because Israel has a record of never lying about doing stuff like this.
Sure, yes.
Senator, what's your response to the latest strikes in the Golan Heights?
Well, look, first we know that Iran, through its surrogates, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, is really the real evil in this area. And Israel has every right to defend itself against Hezbollah.
So,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I like the way he calls them the Houthis, like Houthis and the Blowfish.
Yeah. Well, that's the most benign part of that.
Yes.
One sentence full of lies. So many just tropes already in one sentence. All of Israel's opponents, they're the evil, and Israel has a right to defend itself. Of course, none of these people have the right to defend themselves from decades-long Israeli occupation and aggression. But again, you can say that on corporate TV and get away with it because it's like the air we breathe.
Right.
Like they do against Hamas. It shows you how bad Iran and its surrogates are. These were Arab kids they shot at. They don't care. They sent missiles at, and they don't even care who that is. But having said that, I don't think anyone wants a wider war, so I hope there are moves to de-escalate.
All right, so yes, Iran is behind this. Hezbollah is responsible. They're all evil, but I don't want a wider war, so let's de-escalate. I'm just going to adopt every single Israeli talking point before I call for that. That's Chuck Schumer's message, basically.
Right. He is a peacenik, a reasonable man.
Okay, more Chuck Schumer.
Sorry, guys. More Chucky.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu just in Washington. You were part of the formal bipartisan invitation to have him come to Washington. Yet there was video of you not shaking his hand when he was on the floor on Capitol Hill. Why not? Why did you not shake his hand?
Well, look, I went to this speech because the relationship between Israel and America is ironclad, and I wanted to show that. But at the same time, as everyone knows, I have serious disagreements with the way Benjamin Netanyahu has conducted these policies.
Yes, but you still invited him. Chuck Schumer is the guy who extended the invitation to Netanyahu along with Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson. And so now he wants us to be impressed that he didn't shake the war criminal's hand after welcoming him to Congress and giving him this platform to spew just lie after unhinged lie. And it's a bit better than like, I mean, the Democrats who didn't show up, obviously that's a bit more dignified, but what everyone should have done, I think, is do what Rashida Tlaib did, which is actually protest Netanyahu. She held up a sign saying war criminal, and she was left to do that by herself because nobody else who protested Netanyahu showed up to join her.
Yeah, her sign said war criminal on one side, guilty of genocide on the other. And Schumer is such a cuck that even when asked why he didn't shake his hand, as he just was, he has to pivot immediately to, well, I showed up because we have such an ironclad relationship. He couldn't even answer that part of the question without the disclaimer that, of course, he showed up because we have an ironclad relationship.
Your colleague and friend, former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, tweeted this week. She said, Benjamin Netanyahu's presentation in the House chamber was by far the worst presentation of any foreign dignitary invited and honored with that privilege in American history. Do you agree with her assessment? And do you have any regrets at all about the invitation?
Going back to Nancy Pelosi's statement for a second, look at it here. She doesn't even mention Palestinians in Gaza. It's all about Israeli citizens, the families of the hostages, but not even a word about the tens of thousands of Palestinians who are being killed by Netanyahu with U.S. weapons. So again, it's like when Democrats even are critical of Israel, they're still playing into its mass murder campaign and the underlying, bigotry of the whole thing, where Palestinians here just don't even exist to them.
Right. And like the inherent superiority and human value of Israelis versus Palestinians. And it's a good reminder of even when Chuck Schumer, remember months ago, he actually said Netanyahu should step down when this whole thing winds down. And his argument for that was not because what he was doing to Palestinians, but because he thought it was bad for Israel.
And do you have any regrets at all about the invitation?
Look, no, as I've said, I wanted to show our ironclad commitment to Israel that transcends any one prime minister or any one president, no matter how much you might disagree with that prime minister.
So no matter how many people Israel kills, no matter how forcefully it continues its decades-long policy of expansion and occupation, the commitment is ironclad. And so basically what Chuck Schumer is saying is Israel's great. It's just Netanyahu who I'm kind of lukewarm about, which is why I'm still going to invite him to Congress, but I'm not going to shake his hand.
Right. And
that's the best we can expect from Chuck Schumer. And all these protests are going on every single week outside Chuck Schumer's apartment, not far from me, obviously have rattled him a little bit, but not to the point where it can shake his ironclad commitment to Israel.
He won't shake his hand, and he won't shake his ironclad commitment either.
Exactly. All right. Another warmonger, Lindsey Graham.
Oh, the best.
Serious time over in Israel. Are you confident, Senator, that the U.S. and Lebanese efforts to cool tensions between Israel and Hezbollah will be successful?
No, because I think Iran is behind all of this. And until we put Iran on notice that we're going to hold you accountable for attacks by Hezbollah and Hamas against Israel, you're going to get more of the same. The attack of October the 7th was designed to stop normalization, in my view, between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So until the Iranians believe they're going to get hit, that we start putting their oil refineries on a target list, you're going to get more of this. When it comes to Iran, Biden-Harris have been a colossal failure in terms of controlling the Ayatollah. They've enriched him, and Israel's paying the price.
What do you believe will happen now? Could this conflict spiral, and could it open up a second front?
Yeah, what I worry the most about is a sprint to a nuclear weapon. The Director of National Intelligence gave the Senate a report last week about the status of the Iranian nuclear program and their malign activities, helping their proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas throughout the Mideast. It was stunning. I am very worried that not only you could open up a second front, but they could use these 3 or 4 months before our election to sprint to a nuclear weapon. And we have to put them on notice. That cannot happen.
It's so funny because no one ever talks about the fact that Israel is the only nuclear country in the Middle East, the only country in the Middle East with a nuclear weapon. And the other irony is that the Republicans and Netanyahu are the ones who've done everything in their power to sabotage and kill the nuclear deal that Obama had previously made.
It's totally incoherent. The Iran nuclear deal was working perfectly, as everybody involved acknowledged, but Trump, doing the bidding of people like Sheldon Adelson, killed it. And now Iran is closer if it wants to, but again, Iran does not technically have a nuclear weapons program. They have a nuclear program, but not a nuclear weapons program. And the best way to ensure that they never come close to nuclear weapons would be to return to the Iran deal. But Lindsey Graham can't support that because that entails diplomacy with Iran and recognizing that it has like equal status as a sovereign state, which is the premise of agreements, which neocons cannot support. So therefore, they have to keep actually fueling the threat that they claim they want to stop. It's totally incoherent. Right. And then again, this line about Iran's malign activities, by that he means simply Iran is helping people resist Israeli aggression. That's what he means by that. That's what they mean by malign activities. By the way, Netanyahu in his speech to Congress, he gave a coded reference to Israel's nuclear weapons program. He said, he was talking about like the deep cooperation between Israel and the U.S. And he said something like to the effect of, "I'm choosing my words very carefully, but we've collaborated on some really important programs that keep the world at peace." And he was talking about the U.S. has helped Israel develop its nuclear weapons program, which threatens, the entire planet. So, yeah.
Wink,
and of course, that probably got one of Netanyahu's dozens of standing ovations from Congress, from all these so-called America firsters who leap to their feet every time Netanyahu speaks. Okay, here is another warmonger, Congress member McCaul, who again, like, what is the Republican critique of Biden when it comes to Israel? Not that he's giving it unfettered support to commit mass murder and to cut off all water, fuel, medicine, food to Gaza. An Israeli army unit recently blew up a water reserve in Rafah, just like open terrorism, which they filmed. Michael McCaul is critical of Biden because he says he's not supporting Israeli mass murder enough.
They're not bombing enough water.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the United States in this past week. What have you heard? What have you been told about his request to have more shipments of weapons delivered on a fast-track basis?
Well, I sign off on all foreign military sales, and I sign off on all the ones that have gone to Israel and also to Ukraine and Taiwan. And so the fact is, though, that these shipments have been delayed intentionally. Now, the four corners, that being the chair and ranking member, House Foreign Affairs and Senate Relations, we signed off on these weapons, and for some reason, the administration has withheld those weapons.
What's the reason?
I think maybe it gives them leverage over Israel and decision-making processes. But when I talk to the prime minister in his office, this creates daylight between the United States and Israel. And I think it's very dangerous, especially right now, for us to somehow put daylight between us and our most important U.S. ally, the democracy in the Middle East.
I like the way he name drops that he was hanging out with Bibi in his office. When I talked to the prime minister in his office, no big deal. NBD.
Well, they love that. They love Netanyahu. That's why they stood up for him to applaud and kiss his feet dozens of times. But like,
you mean His Excellency, Aaron?
His Excellency, exactly as Mike Johnson called him. Yeah. So again, he's asked why are we pausing a couple of weapon shipments? And Michael McCaul claims ignorance. He's like, oh, I don't know, to give us leverage. Well, yeah, I mean, if you're supplying a mass murdering army with the weaponry it needs to commit mass murder, then you do have leverage. And if you care about not killing people, or at least if you want to look as if you care about not killing people, right, as Biden does after coming under criticism for it and losing votes over it, then you actually can use your leverage if you want to. But Michael McCaul is upset even with a performative step by Biden to look as if he's using his leverage. They can't tolerate that. There should be no daylight whatsoever. So keep the weapons flowing.
I know. Also, who says that? Like, it's just so weird and gross to insist on having no daylight. Like, Israel's our like conjoined twin that we can't ever depart from in any way. It's just so abnormal.
It's really strange. And I don't get, like, you have Democrats who are mostly in lockstep in supporting Israel, although you have some dissenters like the progressives. But then Republicans with the exception of Thomas Massey,
Yeah,
basically,
yeah.
all just worshiping Israel. And there is a religious component here. They really do, I think, want to hasten the rapture, and they believe Israel advances that goal. And if you look at Israel and how insane it is, I guess you can see why they're so enamored with it, because Israel is kind of a suicidal state.
Right.
And it is threatening Armageddon in a certain respect with all of its policies. So, but what a combination.
Yeah, like Alon Mizrahi said that when we had him on, that they were a suicidal nation and apocalyptic.
Well, we have to be ironclad for the apocalypse, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
And I guess turning to another party, this is a kind of pathetic nominal opposition from Chris Van Hollen, the senator from Maryland. And here's what he has to say about Kamala Harris and what her role in the conflict would be.
A political antenna, a policy antenna. I've been listening to Vice President Harris this week speak about Israel and what's going on with the war with Hamas. You've been listening as well.
By the way, just to point out, Norman Finkelstein made this point that Israel's Hezbollah managed to get the media to accept the phrase "war with Hamas," and that was such a coup for Hezbollah and Israeli, PR. And it really is stunning to hear people describe this as Israel's war on Hamas, as if it's a targeted war against Hamas. How many civilians have to be killed before the media acknowledges that this is not a war on Hamas, it's a war on Palestinians? But it's just an example of how things are you're not aware of how propagandistic it is because you hear that phrase again and again, but it really is stunning that our media frames it that way. Anyway.
Do you believe there is any daylight between her position and articulation of the policy on Israel versus President Biden's?
I don't know. What I think about Vice President Harris's approach here is that all the elements of President Biden's approach are there. She supports them. She's been part of that. So Israel's right to self-defense, the fact that how the war is conducted matters. Hamas can have, no control or governance after this war, no more October 7th. But
wait, how does the way that they conduct this war matter? What is evidence that Biden cares at all about that? What has he done?
I mean, it's a completely meaningless statement. How you carry out mass murder matters.
Right.
Like, what are they saying there?
Yeah.
What have they done to restrain how Israel's carrying out this so-called war, which is, again, it's not a war. It's just a mass murder slaughter. So it's all performative word salad to make it appear as if they're being critical of Israel when they're giving it unfettered support. And again, Chris Van Hollen's considered to be like the dissident end of the Senate spectrum. He has criticized Israel, but yet every time he still votes to arm it to the teeth. And you see here, he endorses basically all the talking points used to wage the mass murder campaign. Israel has a right to defend itself, he says, when in reality, actually, an occupying power doesn't have the right to defend its belligerent occupation. It only has the obligation to end the occupation. And how it wages the mass murder campaign matters. Well, what does it matter how it matters if what you're doing is waging mass murder?
Yeah, where are the red lines, the alleged red lines? Where are the rules of war that we're imposing or demanding? Well, Aaron, we have had, tough conversations.
Yeah, well, exactly. And then he says also that Hamas can't rule Gaza afterwards. Well, again, isn't that up to Palestinians to decide?
No.
Don't we care about democracy, self-determination, things like that? And if we're saying that Hamas can't rule Gaza because some civilians were killed on October 7th, then how then can Israel or the U.S. rule their own country since they kill far more civilians all the time? And in fact, it's not a fair comparison because Hamas is resisting a military occupation, whereas Israel is carrying one out.
Right.
also, very importantly, that the Palestinian Authority has to be the nucleus of governance in a post-war Gaza. They have lots of flaws. They need lots of help to reform. They also need resources. And very importantly, and you mentioned this with Congressman McCaul, a path, although he left out this part, a path to a two-state solution to assure that the great majority of the Palestinian people who have nothing to do with Hamas can have some light at the end of the tunnel. We need equal security, equal dignity, equal rights of self-determination for Israelis and Palestinians alike. And the president has coupled that with what you did talk about, which was a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia, which would be very good for the security interests of Israel.
And she
Okay, so he did talk about equal rights, which is actually, you don't hear every politician saying that because the whole Israeli project is premised on denying Palestinians equal rights. But notice, of course, he would never say equal rights for Palestinians inside Israel's recognized borders because Israel is a Jewish supremacist state, so they don't deserve equal rights, or anyone who's not Jewish doesn't deserve equal rights. But again, what are you going to do to actually achieve even a Palestinian state? Nothing. All they do is talk about a path. We have to have a path for it.
Right.
It's not about a path. It's about either you're for it or you're not. Like, and if you're for it, then you'll say that Israel has no right to any of the settlements and has to abandon all of them, not just stop expending them, but abandon all the settlements and withdraw from the occupied territories, which no U.S. politician has ever been willing to do, as far as I can remember. So let's talk even of a path to a Palestinian state. It's also misdirection because, again, it's just trying to put off into the future some like nebulous thing that will never actually be achieved because nobody wants to take the actual concrete steps to achieve it.
Right. And as Gideon Levy has pointed out, everyone who today is for a two-state solution was against it when it was possible. And also the built-in arrogance and imperialist hubris of Van Hollen, who's supposed to be one of the good guys, determining who's going to rule. You know, it's going to be the PA, the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas. Again, as if that, I mean, you've said this before, it's not up to Palestinians, but it's just the hubris is so casually inserted because, as you said before, it's like the air they breathe. It's like a fish not realizing they're wet. It's disgusting.
of course, will remain President Biden's vice president for the rest of the term, but she's also now the presumptive Democratic nominee 100 days between now and the election. Would you counsel her in any way to separate or differentiate herself, or at least define herself on the Israel issue on her own terms quickly, or just to keep going along as is?
Well, so I believe the elements of her policy are the same. But the question is how we succeed in achieving the elements of the policy. I have been critical of the Biden administration at times for not using all the levers of influence we have to achieve President Biden's stated goals, including what a post-war Gaza looks like. So I was pleased that after her meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu, the vice president made a statement, a public statement, not a written statement, and she did it with clarity.
I don't think she did anything with clarity because this answer makes no sense. He's asked, like, should Kamala Harris adopt any policy positions on Israel-Palestine that differs from Joe Biden? And Chris Van Hollen can't give a straight answer. He just says the elements of the policy are the same, but she should go about it differently, which I think by that he means simply she should be better at pretending to care about Palestinians than Joe Biden is.
Better optics, better language.
Yeah.
Not different policy. Yeah. Just less offensive.
Yeah.
And just in rhetoric. Yeah.
So that's our Democratic dissent when it comes to Joe Biden. That's the best we could do, at least on the Senate side. Rashida Tlaib, again, she's actually been principled, but she's been marginalized in her party because of it. And for example, whereas other members of the squad are now rushing to endorse Kamala Harris already, Rashida Tlaib is asking for her to commit to ending the genocide, which she has not done. So there's basically one progressive Democrat willing to use their leverage, and everybody else is just falling in line. Okay. Another fan favorite for useful idiots audiences is Senator Tom Cotton.
The best.
Republican Senator Tom Cotton. Senator, thanks so much for joining us. I do want to ask you, overnight, the Israeli Defense Forces struck targets inside Lebanon, focused on Hezbollah, the terrorist group there, in retaliation for a rocket attack that killed 12 children in a Druze community in the Golan Heights in Israel. Hezbollah does appear responsible for that attack. What do you know about the Israeli?
Hezbollah does appear responsible, Jake says, because Israel said so. That's his evidence, yeah. And again, he calls Hezbollah a terrorist group. Hezbollah was founded after Israel invaded Lebanon in 1982 and killed tens of thousands of people. And Hezbollah responds to resist Israeli aggression. But Jake Tapper just casually declares that they're a terrorist group. When, again, their primary targets are military and the Israeli military. And they successfully drove Israel out of Lebanon after 18 years of military occupation in the year 2000. It's funny. Remember recently I appeared on Piers Morgan and I debated two Israeli propagandists. Well, when I said that Hezbollah was created after Israel invaded in 1982, the former IDF spokesperson guy, he chastised me because he said, no, we also invaded in 1978. It's like, I'm so sorry. I forgot to mention your earlier invasion. I forgot you've violated Lebanon's sovereignty more times than I acknowledge. But anyway, I was talking about the timeline for when Hezbollah was created, but he's that was his counterpoint, was that we actually invaded earlier than I said.
You're not giving us the credit we deserve for having more blood on our hands.
Yeah. So I apologize.
Aaron, he really that was the guy who totally humiliated you, right? By pointing out that you had books behind you?
Well, that was the other guy.
Oh, that was the other guy. Okay.
That was the Russian Israeli settler. This is I'm talking about the former IDF spokesperson who recently put out, he was the person who put out those hoax videos from Al-Shifa Hospital, where they basically planted weapons in MRI machines and said that we found the Hamas command center in Al-Shifa. And he was such a malicious liar that even the BBC had to call him out for it. And I didn't know that before I went on air with him. And I wish I did, because I would have called him out for that directly. But anyway.
Well, it's hard to keep, don't beat yourself up, Aaron. It's really hard to keep up with the lies of Israel and Israeli officials.
Well, thankfully they have Jake Tapper on the case for them, covering up.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's his beat.
Response, and how worried are you that this could escalate into a larger regional conflict involving not just Lebanon and Hezbollah, but maybe even Iran?
Well, Jake, what I'm worried about is Iranian-backed terrorists continuing to blow up innocent children in Israel. That's what we saw yesterday in this heinous attack. Last October, we saw...
It's interesting. He never talks about heinous attacks killing children when Israel does it. And
the difference is Israel's actually doing it. And they're not just doing it in a couple of incidents, they're doing it by the thousands. I mean, thousands upon thousands of children have been slaughtered with U.S. weapons. There was recent footage you can see from Gaza of beheaded babies, unlike the non-existent beheaded babies that Israel and its apologists claim were killed on October 7th by Hamas, which is not true. There was only one child killed by a stray bullet on October 7th, but Biden, for example, claimed to have seen photos of that when they don't actually exist.
And his staff told him not to.
Yeah. And again, it's not clear who killed these people in the Israeli occupied Syrian Golan Heights, but all of them were not Israeli citizens, and Hezbollah has denied responsibility. And Israel's been caught lying so many times. There's no reason at all, at least, to reflexively endorse Israeli claims. If anything, any Israeli claim should be treated as a lie unless proven otherwise, I think.
I totally agree. Yeah.
Iranian-backed terrorists killed more than 1,200 Jews in the worst atrocity against Jews since World War II.
And again, if Jake Tapper did his job, he would point out that actually, first of all, the figure is about 1,200 on October 7th, but about 400 of those are military. So those are not innocent civilians. Those are people enforcing a belligerent military occupation. And second of all, we know that Israel did kill some of its own people on October 7th because they enacted the Hannibal Directive, which says that Israel would rather kill its own people than let them be taken captive for a hostage exchange for Palestinian hostages. And of course, even though Israeli media now acknowledges the Hannibal Directive was employed on October 7th, U.S. media doesn't. It's just not that fact is not allowed to exist. And we don't know how many people Israel killed on October 7th because there's been no independent investigation. But when you have Apache helicopters firing on vehicles, you're probably going to kill a lot of people.
Right. And Israelis said this happened. Like there were Israeli witnesses who witnessed Israel killing its own.
Yeah. And you can read about them in Israeli media, but not yet in U.S. media, because that's just...
It's just stunning that U.S. media doesn't consider this. I mean, obviously it's newsworthy, but they're not forced to even kicking and screaming cover this story that's so undeniably newsworthy, but it just complicates the narrative.
And as Max Blumenthal says, if Tom Cotton is going to say that this was the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, well, given that Israel killed some of its own people on October 7th, this makes Israel complicit in the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust.
Right. It also undermines the claim that Israel makes the world safer for Jews.
Well, yeah, I mean, certainly, beyond the fact that it killed its own people on October 7th, the October 7th wouldn't have happened to begin with if Israel wasn't presiding over the world's longest running military occupation.
Yeah. And it's also so offensive to compare what happened on October 7th to the Holocaust, the Holocaust was about exterminating or attempting to exterminate Jews, innocent Jews who were not occupying, who were not part of a military occupation that denied people's human rights. And again, this is why it's so dangerous, but so common for people like, the Israeli government, the ADL, AIPAC, Cotton, Zionists to engage in this very anti-Semitic conflation of Jews and Zionists, which is anti-Semitic and puts Jews at risk. Because as Israel commits these heinous crimes and claims to do it in the name of Jews, how could that not create more anti-Semitism? And by the way, hit the like button, guys. Hit the like. Thank you.
Kamala Harris, in her very first statement, and still to my knowledge, only statement on a matter of great public importance, came out after a meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu and equivocated between Hamas and Israel and effectively blamed Israel for civilian casualties in Gaza or for the lack of food in Gaza that Hamas is diverting from aid stations. That simply makes it harder to get a peace deal. It makes it harder to have stability in the Middle East. And frankly, it emboldens Iran and terrorist groups like Hezbollah because they believe that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will continue to put more pressure on Israel than it puts on Iran and its terrorists that are encircling Israel with the stated objective to destroy Israel. What we should do is back Israel to the hilt, not put pressure on Israel, not scramble behind the scenes to try to stop Israel from retaliating appropriately for this heinous attack that killed more than a dozen people, including children. So
so first of all, I wish Kamala Harris took the position said he's ascribing to her. That'd be wonderful. So, for example, holding Israel responsible for killing people in Gaza and for blocking vital supplies, food, water, medicine. That'd be great if Kamala Harris actually did that. But he's mad. Putting aside that she hasn't actually really done that, he's mad that Israel would dare be blamed for the killings that Israel has conducted and the deliberate siege that Israel is carrying out. He somehow says that that's all the fault of Hamas, which is insane. And Jake Tapper, of course, could press him on that. Like, well, Israel did say it was going to cut off water and food, and Israel has killed all these people. So why is it a bad thing to blame Israel for actions that it's not only taking credit for, but is directly carrying out? Like, that would be an obvious follow-up there for Jake Tapper, but of course, he just moves on.
No, his only pushback is to point out how Kamala Harris is critical of Hamas.
Did speak after her meeting with Netanyahu. She did talk about Hamas, though. You described it as equivocating. I want to just play what she said and then talk about it more.
Hamas is a brutal terrorist organization. On October 7, Hamas triggered this war when it massacred 1,200 innocent people, including 44 Americans.
Again, this is not a huge point in the context of things, but again, you can't say that the 1,200 Israelis killed on October 7th were innocent when hundreds of them were soldiers enforcing a military occupation. Like, no matter what the conflict is, when soldiers are killed, you don't say that they're innocent soldiers. They're soldiers. It's a war. And in this case, they were enforcing a military occupation. But they get conflated with innocent civilians who were killed on October 7th. And there were atrocities committed against Israeli civilians. But of course, what's also not mentioned here is that at least some of those killings were carried out by Israel when it enacted the Hannibal Directive.
And also, as we've said before, there is a legal right to resist your occupiers. There's not a legal right to resist, to kill civilians, but you have a legal right to resist occupiers. So the legal right to resist soldiers, combatants.
Hamas has committed horrific acts of sexual violence and took 250 hostages.
And again, the sexual violence claim, there's no evidence actually for even a single act of sexual violence. Not yet. Every claim that's been made has fallen short. And we've covered that before. We did a whole episode with Ali Abunimah about it. And Kamala Harris, despite claims from people like Tom Cotton that she's like, I don't know, siding with Hamas, she's repeating all of the Israeli talking points that are used to wage its mass murder campaign.
I always wish the Democrats were the caricatures that their critics make them. You know, like they're socialists, you know, Palestine. They're Palestinians, Palestine-loving socialists. It would be amazing if they were. And of course, you know, I haven't heard any of these shows talk about the credible reports of sexual abuse of Palestinian prisoners.
That's right. Yeah, no, that gets unmentioned because that's not useful for the narrative they want to push, which is basically that we can't negotiate with these people. We can't live with them because they're such sadistic monsters. So therefore, Hamas and everybody around them has to be wiped out. That's the point of all this propaganda.
Right.
But
and
anyway,
and Francesca Albanese pointed out, and we asked her about this when we interviewed her. She said that so many journalists have interviewed her about the sexual abuse of Palestinians, and none of them have ever written about it. None of them have ever published the information they got from her.
Well, Jake Tapper, as we can see here, that's his response to Tom Cotton. You know, not that it's okay to actually fault Israel for its crimes, but hey, Kamala Harris is whitewashing Israeli crimes just like you are, sir.
Right.
That's Jake Tapper's comeback. Yes.
Right. All right. More of this?
That's a pretty strong condemnation of Hamas. One can condemn Hamas and also want Israel to wage war in a different way, no?
As is sometimes said, the most important parts of a statement comes after the but. We didn't hear the but there, but she said but, and then what followed is continued pressure on Israel, blaming Israel for civilian casualties in Gaza, when in reality, it's Hamas that is using civilians as human shields and locating its command posts and mortar firing positions at schools or at mosques or at hospitals. And where's the condemnation for this heinous attack by Hezbollah yesterday that blew up 12 children? As we came on the air, Kamala Harris and her campaign has still not said anything to condemn Hezbollah for that attack. Again, this is only a week into her presidency, or her presidential campaign, and we see why she is a dangerous liberal. I saw Kamala Harris up close for 4 years on the Senate Intelligence Committee. What the American people see.
Just later on in the day, Kamala Harris's National Security Advisor, Philip Gordon, did put out a statement, and it was so extreme that he endorsed the Trump position of recognizing Israel's annexation of the Syrian Golan Heights, because Philip Gordon said that we were horrified by this attack by Hezbollah in northern Israel. So he's saying now that this Syrian territory, which Israel has occupied since 1967, he called it northern Israel. So in fact, Kamala Harris is therefore adopting the Trump position that Israel can steal the Syrian territory, and therefore it's northern Israel. So again, this like weird game where both sides pretend as if they have different positions when really it's simply a matter of style, not substance. It leads to full support for Israeli hegemony and aggression. And this is our political spectrum. Someone like Tom Cotton, who's like unhinged in his support for Israel, and someone like Jake Tapper here trying to say, well, actually, like the unhinged policy is correct, but let's just talk about it in a slightly different way.
Right. That is our spectrum.
This week, it's just a small sampling of what she would do to make America less safe and make the world more chaotic. Remember, she took credit for a lot of the worst decisions of the Biden administration. She said she was right there when they decided on the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. This is who Kamala Harris always has been. This is who she will be, a San Francisco liberal who cannot keep this country safe.
Stupid talking points. So gross.
A San Francisco liberal sounds great to me. If only.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
If only. I'm just kidding. There are some problems with San Francisco liberals, but I certainly take that over Tom Cotton.
Yes. Yeah. What's he? An Arkansas reactionary?
An Israel firster.
Yeah.
And really an apocalypse firster, because that's where he's pushing us to.
Yeah.
Not America first, apocalypse first, Armageddon first. Okay. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, he's emerging as really and I got to say, he's pretty good at it as like a top surrogate for Kamala Harris's campaign. And he went on Fox News and defended the Biden-Harris record. And I got to say, liberals were pretty excited about this. This was a buzzworthy performance by Pete Buttigieg.
It's also fresh off the campaign trail, Pete Buttigieg. He's appearing today in his personal capacity, so no disrespect that we aren't using your cabinet title, but you are here as Pete today. Right. Okay, so you've been on the trail. A week ago, we were doing the show. President Biden was still in the race. We now have a presumptive new nominee. But less than a week later, Bret Stephens is writing this in the New York Times, saying the one thing the Democratic Party is not supposed to be is anti-democratic, a party in which insiders select the nominee from the top down, not the bottom up, and which expects the rank and file to fall in line and clap enthusiastically.
That's never happened before. That's never happened
right.
before. Yeah,
never.
No. That's not the Democratic Party. You know, it's rigged the primary against Bernie Sanders in 2016, and then in 2020 got all the neoliberal candidates to drop out at the same time so they could
including Mayo Pete,
so they could anoint Joe Biden. No, that's not the Democrats. Never.
That's the playbook of ruling parties in autocratic states.
That's the playbook of the DNC, and in fact, both parties, because they're both controlled by elites. Sorry, Bret Stephens, to burst your bubble.
I know, as if Bret Stephens is a populist.
Know the optics of this, that it was donors who pulled the plug on President Biden, and they're the ones calling the shots about how this proceeds.
Well, it's true that the Democratic Party is not famous for falling in line. That's part of why it's so remarkable that in a matter of days, Kamala Harris.
You literally fell in line. You were one of the Democrats that literally fell in line in a matter of days after getting a phone call from Barack Obama.
Exactly.
Has consolidated our big tent party, and this is something that is coming from the ground up. You can feel it. I was in a field office in Michigan yesterday close to our home and saw an extraordinary energy. So many people from different corners of our party ready to support Kamala Harris, ready for her to defeat Donald Trump. And
by the way, Mayo Pete and Kamala Harris are both the progeny of Marxist fathers. Kamala's father is a Marxist economist, and Mayor Pete's father was a Gramsci scholar.
It's a level of energy that, frankly, I haven't seen on the campaign trail in a long time.
You actually have gotten more delegates, though, than she has. I mean, when you ran back in 2020, you accrued them. She didn't get any delegates. She dropped out of that race. Former staffer of hers says she worries about this coronation. She wrote about it in The Atlantic, saying she wasn't tested and tried. Are you worried about it? Because Bret Stephens also says this. He says she's unpopular. She's been a bad campaigner. She's been a bad manager. She's a blue state Dem who's got to win purple states. She's anchored to the president's record. He worries that, maybe Democrats should be more worried that there hasn't been a thorough vetting. So when she gets into this head-to-head with President Trump, there will be wishes that she had been vetted.
The idea.
I mean, I will say, it is true, of course, that the process that has anointed Kamala Harris is totally anti-democratic. Democrats were denied a real primary. They didn't allow debates. They did not really allow for any serious challenger against Biden. But at the same time, for Republicans to complain about all that, it's pretty disingenuous. They don't care about the will of the Democratic voters being denied. They care because they were so excited that they were going up against Joe Biden, who was a horrible candidate. And now Kamala, whatever you think of her, is a lot more competent than Joe Biden. It's not difficult. Yeah. And they're angry about that because they were riding high. And it's amazing. Trump survived an assassination attempt, but yet has not seen any real bump in his polls. And I think that reflects the fact that he also is a terrible candidate.
Yeah.
And now they're panicking because they have to go up against someone who's not out of it like Joe Biden is. And Trump's record and his policies and his personality are going to be on fuller display now because they can't hide behind Joe Biden not being able to complete a sentence.
Right.
So that's where I think all this focus on Kamala Harris's appointment is coming from. Even though I think there is a fair point to be made there, obviously, that we could have had a real primary.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And it's also hypocritical when it comes from Republicans.
The idea that somebody hasn't been tested or vetted when they have been vice president of the United States for nearly 4 years just doesn't make any sense. She is in obviously one of the most visible leadership roles in the country. And she's demonstrated both her effectiveness in that job and a vision for the country that Americans agree with. And that's the real reason I think she's going to win, is that most Americans already agree with her on the issues that they care about the most, that affect them the most, whether we're talking about choice and her stance on defending a woman's right to choose versus Donald Trump, who eliminated a right to choose in this country.
Well, he sent it back to the states, to be fair.
Let's be very clear. He is proud of the fact that he demolished the national right to choose in this country, period.
See, this is where Democrats, I think, are going to have an advantage because, again, now that Joe Biden's off the ticket, they can talk about issues where they are way less extreme than Republicans, as opposed to keeping the focus on Joe Biden's incoherence. And I personally, I would not be surprised if Kamala pulls it off, just because Trump is so bad, and Biden was so bad that he distracted from how bad Trump is.
Right, you didn't have to deal with the content of what was being said.
Yeah.
And Trump lied through his teeth, obviously, about when he said that like all the legal experts supported the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I mean, that's just a lie. Neither legal experts nor people supported that. Very unpopular.
Well, Katie, this clip is funny because now there's talk of who will Kamala choose as the VP nominee. And among the candidates is, what's his name? Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
Hardcore Israel supporter. And we're going to hear a little spin from Jake Tapper here, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. This is good.
Let's switch to the Veep stakes because I know that everybody has an opinion on that. We just heard an audition from Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Some of the other possibilities, we hear she's going to pick a running mate by August 7th, which is pretty soon. Sources say that her list includes Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, North Carolina Governor Roy Cooper, Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Governor Josh Shapiro, the great Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and of course Minnesota Governor Walz, who you would agree is all things being equal, it's a pretty decent pick, maybe.
Yeah, he was pretty agile this morning on.
I like the way he's so excited. He's agile. Like he can form complete sentences, unlike Biden.
The interview with you. I've also thought Shapiro is a pretty talented guy. I know you know him. I wonder if she's able to choose him because of the politics in the Democratic Party around Israel and given Shapiro's views on that right now. So,
although I don't know anybody more critical of Netanyahu as a governor than Shapiro, but for some reason, people keep attacking him.
So obviously what Jake is doing there is he's suggesting that people are attacking Josh Shapiro for some reason, and it's because he's Jewish. It's not because of his policies. Now, the only problem with that is if you actually look at what Shapiro has done and said, it makes a lot of sense that people are particularly upset by the prospect of his being named a Veep. I mean, he's someone who is so extreme that he actually said of protesters, he said, if this were people dressed up in KKK outfits or KKK regalia, we wouldn't accept it. His position was so bad that Muslim voters canceled a Ramadan event that they were going to be doing with him. He's also supportive of anti-BDS laws and supported actions against Ben and Jerry's for their decision not to sell ice cream in occupied Palestinian territory.
Well, for some reason, people who oppose mass murder don't like being compared to the KKK.
Right.
Because they must be anti-Semitic, according to Jake Tapper.
Right.
I mean, and Jake Tapper thinks that just because someone's been critical of Netanyahu,
right,
that means that if you're somehow critical of them, then you must be anti-Semitic. When again, Josh Shapiro supports Israel to the teeth, like he supports everything Israel's doing in Gaza, which is mass murder and a starvation siege, and he's calling all the protesters on campus who are opposed to Israel's actions anti-Semitic. And in Jake Tapper's mind, the
KKK parallels.
Yeah, KKK.
So obviously,
funny.
the criticism of him is because he's a Jew. Yeah. He's also supporting a bipartisan bill that would block colleges and universities from receiving state funding if they boycott or divest from Israel.
Well, for some reason,
yeah,
people believe in academic freedom and free speech because they must be anti-Semites.
So ridiculous.
Yeah, that's so funny. Okay, another VP potential nominee is Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota, and he was asked about his suitability as a candidate by the one and only Jake Tapper.
trying to paint Vice President Harris as an ultra-liberal. Of all her potential running mates, you might have the most progressive record as governor. I know you were more
Dun, dun, dun.
of a moderate when you were in the House, but you've legalized recreational marijuana, you passed universal background checks on guns, you expanded LGBTQ protections, you implemented tuition-free college for low-income Minnesotans. There's free breakfast and lunch for school kids. Do you think your record is an asset to the ticket, or would it risk fueling Trump's attacks as you being a big government liberal?
I can't tell here if Jake is trying to help Governor Tim Walz, because all those policies, obviously, to I think most people, fair-minded people, those are good things to give, for example, kids free lunches and to expand healthcare. But I can't tell if Jake Tapper is just trying to give him a layup here, or if Jake Tapper really believes that all these policies that help average people are a liability.
Right.
And the problem is it's Jake Tapper, so I just can't assume that he has the basic decency to recognize that a free lunch for low-income children is a good thing. Like, I don't know when it comes to Jake Tapper.
Right. Or is it going to cost them the election? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look at his face. He looks a little indignant here. Like, sir, you gave these kids a free lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he does.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear Walz's response.
What a monster. Kids are eating and having full bellies so they can go learn. And women are making their own healthcare decisions. And we're a top 5 business state. And we also rank in the top 3 of happiness. Look, they're going to label whatever they're going to label. He's going to roll it out, mispronounce names, to try and make the case. The fact of the matter is, where you see the policies that Vice President Harris was a part of making, Democratic governors across the country executed those policies, and quality of life is higher, the economies are better, all of those things. Educational attainment is better. So yeah, my kids are going to eat here, and you're going to have a chance to go to college, and you're going to have an opportunity to live where we're working on reducing carbon emissions. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have personal incomes that are higher, and you're going to have health insurance. So if that's where they want to label me, I'm more than happy to take the label.
I mean, I'll say that what is nice about Walz is that he's unapologetic, and that's so rare to see from a Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know too much about him, but certainly Jake Tapper gave him a real layup there, and he certainly seized the moment. People have criticized Tim Walz because he sent in the National Guard to quell the George Floyd protests. So obviously, with anybody, there's plenty to criticize. But yeah, a talking point that's not going to work is criticizing him for trying to feed low-income students. I don't think most people will be sympathetic to that argument. Jake Tapper apparently notwithstanding.
Right.
All right. Well, Tim Walz was also asked about his thoughts on Trump.
Gotten some attention this week for calling Trump and Vance and Republicans in general weird. And I think that you're the one that set this tone. And there's this shift. The Harris campaign seems to be following your lead, echoing this language. Why do you think weird is a more effective attack line against Trump than what Democrats have been done previously, which is argue that he's an existential threat to democracy?
Yeah, and it's an observation on this, and being a school teacher, I see a lot of things. But my point on this is people kept talking about, look, Donald Trump is going to put women's lives at risk. That's 100% true. Donald Trump is potentially going to end constitutional liberties that we have, end voting. I do believe all those things are a real possibility, but it gives him way too much power. Listen to the guy. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter and shocking sharks and just whatever crazy thing pops into his mind. And I thought we just give him way too much credit. And I think one of the things is,
as people know, I did like what he had to say about sharks, but anyway.
Is when you just ratchet down some of the, the scariness or whatever, and just name it what it is. I got to tell you, Jake, my observation on this is, have you ever seen the guy laugh? That seems very weird to me, that an adult can go through 6.5 years of being in the public eye. If he has laughed, it's at someone, not with someone. That is weird behavior. And I don't think you call it anything else. It is simply what we're observing.
I mean, look, Trump is weird. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he had Hulk Hogan open up for him at the RNC. That is kind of weird. And JD Vance, he's gotten a lot of attention recently for his various.
Did not have sex with a couch, though, as we confirmed on this week's episode.
We did do some deep investigative reporting on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we confirmed that JD Vance didn't have sex with a couch. That's the kind of important journalism that you're supporting here at Useful Idiots. But yeah, I don't know. Look, of all the VP picks, Tim Walz seems to be the least objectionable to me. I mean, certainly, I know Jake Tapper wants to.
Oh, really, Aaron? Is that because he's not? You know.
Yeah. All right. Well, going back to Chuck Schumer, he had some thoughts about Trump's pick of JD Vance as well.
President Harris, now the presumptive nominee. Senator, are you encouraging Senate Democrats, including those in battleground states, to invite her to campaign with them, to have her in their advertisements?
Yeah, the Biden-Harris record is just incredible, as I mentioned. All the specific things that they have passed together working with us. So it's an incredible record, and our senators are already talking about it. They're, cutting ribbons at new bridges. They're bringing rural broadband. They're bringing broadband to rural areas. They're opening up new factories from chip fabs. So it's a great, great record, and it.
The Republicans are so bad and so devoted to the ultra rich that it lets Democrats pretend as if they're actually sort of like New Deal Democrats, like overseeing this like progressive resurgence, investing in infrastructure. Personally, as I go around the country, it's hard for me to see. I mean, I do think that Democrats are better on domestic issues than Republicans because, I mean, it's really hard not to be. But the Republicans are so devoted just to like serving their donors and to not doing anything for like anything to do with social welfare. The Democrats can pretend as if they're doing all these wonderful things when really I think their actual record is kind of underwhelming.
Yeah, they're just less evil on some issues. But by the way, I meant to say this before when we were talking about Walz. I mean, I agree with what he said when he pointed out that there are some legitimate, real destructive, dangerous things that Trump does, like his like what happened with Roe v. Wade, which he claims credit for through his judicial appointments. But I think that Democrats, I think maybe what Walz is doing is he's trying to not overstate things because I think they can be hyperbolic about certain things, not with abortion, but with other things. I know, right? But like, it is just stupid. It's just bad because it's so alienating for people who aren't already hating Trump. I think they just think the Democrats are hysterical and unreliable critics of him. So, I'm very sympathetic to that argument too. I mean, obviously saying that Trump will end democracy and he will be a dictator. He's the next Hitler. I'm sorry. We had 4 years of him. He was like a pretty standard Republican of just enriching the ultra wealthy and serving neocons, despite his own claims that he was against the deep state. So yeah, I certainly agree that Democrats are hyperbolic and focusing on the wrong aspects of Trump that are dangerous. He certainly did have dangerous policies, but not the ones the Democrats actually focus on, because actually they support most of those policies. Such as, for example, him tearing up nuclear treaties with Russia. One of the most reckless things I think you can do for the planet. Democrats don't care because that fuels tensions with Russia, and they're all about that. Right.
Senate candidates run on it. And let me just say one thing. Just compare that to the Republican record, to the Trump-Vance ticket. It's extreme. This Project 2025 shows it would take the rights away from women. It would take away rights of working people and help only the very wealthy. It would even be a threat to our democracy. And one more point about this.
In fairness to Trump, he's disavowed Project 2025. He says he has nothing to do with it. Although, it's from the Heritage Foundation, which JD Vance especially, I think, has deeper ties to than even Trump does. So I understand why people make the association. But in fairness to Donald J. Trump, he does say that he has nothing to do with Project 2025. Although I believe people involved in it used to work for his administration. So, but yeah, certainly this is like a really big talking point for Democrats right now.
And that is the addition of J.D. Vance to this ticket. It's incredibly bad choice. I think Donald Trump, I know him, and he's probably sitting and watching the TV. And every day, Vance, it comes out, Vance has done something more extreme, more weird, more erratic. Vance seems to be more erratic and more extreme than President Trump. And I'll bet President Trump is sitting there scratching his head and wondering, why did I pick this guy? The choice may be one of the best things he ever did for Democrats.
What do you mean?
Now, the president has about 10 days before the Ohio ballot is locked in, and he has a choice. Does he keep Vance on the ticket, where he already has a whole lot of baggage? He's probably going to be more baggage over the weeks because we'll hear more things about him. Or does he pick someone new? It's his choice.
I mean, JD Vance.
No, sorry, yeah.
Well, JD Vance has cotton heat for example, complaining that childless cat ladies run the U.S.
Yeah,
and he rather than just apologize for offending people, he doubled down on it,
right.
and he is getting a lot of attention for that. And he's also has some very extreme views on abortion, and of course, he initially used to be a hardcore anti-Trumper.
Yeah,
so
compared him to Hitler.
Yeah, although apparently that quote is taken out of context.
Oh, okay.
I don't know.
All right.
But,
then apologies if that's misinformation. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I don't know how Trump feels about JD Vance, but certainly he hasn't helped Trump in the polls. And even coming within less than an inch of his life in an assassination attempt hasn't helped Trump in the polls. And I think whether it's JD Vance or someone else, I just think Trump has a very limited ceiling because of people now know who he is after 4 years of him being in office, and he can't anymore pretend that he's going to drain the swamp when he enlarged it. So, yeah, that's where we're at.
And he can't hide behind making fun of Joe Biden anymore.
No, because Joe's out. Yeah. All right. Well, should we wrap it there?
Sure. Or do you want? Yeah, sure. We can wrap it there. We had one more clip, but we can make that actually Thursday Throwdown.
Thanks so much for joining us, everybody. This has been a great edition of Monday Morning. Our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Go there, support the show, get bonus content, keep us going. Katie, anything you want to plug?
Not yet. Not really. Just having a great time interviewing. That sounds kind of weird. Doing important interviews with Holocaust survivors speaking out against Gaza. Yeah.
And that's for a forthcoming documentary that you're working on.
Yeah, exactly.
Very
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
I want to plug one thing. I've been censored by Facebook. Facebook has apparently taken down like all my articles and said they violate community standards. I've gotten a bunch of messages from people. So for anyone who's noticed that, I'm trying to work on it, but I don't know. Maybe that's just like the new reality we got to accept in this world. Is our tech overlords will decide what we can read or not, and maybe there's nothing I can do. I don't know, but I'm trying to work on that.
Wow. Well, what can we do to support you, Aaron?
I don't know, because I barely use Facebook, so
I know, me too.
Yeah, I mean, like, do I really care? I kind of don't.
Yeah, but the principle.
But the principle, yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, again, our website is usefulidiots.podcast.com. Please go there and support us. And thanks for tuning in.
Yep. See you guys next week. Bye, everyone. Or see you this week for our